trades in T20 cricket often end poorly, and there are very few leagues that even have them. In US sports and football, trades and transfers are followed about as much as the game itself. In cricket, Ben Dunk can be the highest scorer in the tournament, have one bad season, and be traded for a guy who's basically never played before. In the IPL, there is one team who loves to trade, and that is the Delhi Capitals. Perhaps because Ricky Ponting is an Aussie rules football guy, he seems keen on swapping players everywhere. They've made 3 fairly important trades, and it's worth looking at all of them. But just before we do, let's look at a non-Delhi trade. In 2018, Quinton de Kock didn't do much for RCB. In 8 games, he was under par with strike rate and average for an opener. He gave them extra value with his wicket-keeping, but he didn't live up to what he had done earlier with the Delhi Daredevils. But at Delhi, he got 3 times the amount of games, which was a much better sample size. He also wasn't very good in ODIs in 2018. But his numbers clearly show that he was no ordinary player, and he had conquered the IPL once before, and it was quite clear he would do so again. RCB were very poorly run at that time, and Mumbai were very well run. Just by that fact alone, if Mumbai wanted de Kock, that should have been enough to let RCB know they were making a mistake. Instead they sold him, not traded. And they lost one of the best white ball hitters in the game who also happened to have a little bit of all-round skill, and they took no player in return for him. Their team got worse and very slightly richer. It allowed Mumbai to upgrade their roster without the need to lose any players at all, and not for an average talent, for a multi-skilled player who had already proved himself in the IPL. Anyway, that's RCB. So let's get back to Delhi. In 2019, the Sunrisers traded Shikhar Dhawan to Delhi. At that point, Dhawan had just played his best ever season of IPL. Until then, never really scoring high runs, but also doing it slowly. Trading him that year was a good idea if you believed his 2018 season was a one-off. And in return, the Sunrisers got a solid fringe all-rounder, a decent backup spinner, and a young all-rounder who may still yet become a good player. Also, the Sunrisers had Bairstow and Warner with Williamson as a backup. They were okay for openers. Had Dhawan gone back to his normal form, that would have been a really good trade for the Sunrisers. But either Delhi knew something was up with Dhawan, or they just took a flyer and had a bit of a fluke. At 32, he was a career ordinary player. Since then, he has had his best 3 years. This last one was good on a level that he hadn't even flirted with before. The man upped his average and his strike rate massively. That doesn't happen. The Sunrisers made a good trade, Delhi made a good trade, it just happened to work for one team and less for the other. Delhi also picked up Ravi Ashwin from Kings 11. Ashwin is one of the most underrated T20 players in the world, but he's not been at his very best over the last 3 years. He's basically now an average off-spinner, but he also brings experience and his brain. With the entire tournament moving to the UAE, having him to bowl, and probably just as importantly mentor other spinners, was a really good choice. Delhi made 2 trades, both for experienced local players. One on an upswing and one on a downswing. They lost 3 fringe players and some cash for that. Those trades worked. Of course, this leads us to the other Delhi trade, which since the final has been in the news a bit. Tom Moody has said a fair bit about that trade already. But let's take a step back. We're all living in some pretty intense recency bias with this one. Bolt took a wicket with his first ball, added another one shortly after, and being that Delhi swapped Bolt to Mumbai for nothing more than cash, and you'd assume not that much cash, it's not ideal. But let's just break it down a little. Delhi had Bolt in 2018 and 2019. And at that point, as good a test and ODIs player as he had been, Bolt really hadn't been all that great in the IPL. In 2018, he had a pretty good year for Delhi, but nothing like what he did this year for Mumbai. Those numbers are obscene. And when you break down his power play, it gets worse. For Delhi, Bolt struggled at the top, even in his good year. And that's what you pay him for. In 2019, he bowled 60 balls in the power play and didn't take a wicket. This year, his 16 wickets ties with the most wickets ever in the first 6 overs of any season of IPL cricket. These 3 have the most wickets in a single season in the power play. But there was Kimber once, who had an incredible run in the power play in 2010, and he only played 6 games. I just wanted to add that, really. There just aren't enough Kimber facts in the world for me. So Bolt, helped by the atmosphere of a place that was never supposed to host the IPL, destroys the team that got rid of him and got nothing back. But Delhi had seen very little of this potential with Bolt, and he'd never been a top IPL bowler, even if everyone knew he had the talent to produce this kind of season. They didn't get rid of a stud, they got rid of a bowler who hadn't quite been at his best. And you can look at this another way. Delhi made the Ashwin and Bolt trades within a week of each other, and both were made with money changing hands. This means they essentially spent money on Ashwin and got some of that money back on Bolt. Now, without knowing the exact amounts, perhaps they were at a loss, but it was worth trading for Ashwin and making a small loss. But they traded with Mumbai for Bolt. Mumbai, who were already the best team they have to go up against. Mumbai, who had already upgraded their roster the year before without losing any talent. Mumbai, who had delisted Jason Behrendorff and Mustafiz Rahman, and who desperately wanted a reliably world-class left-arm seamer. Delhi had a choice here. Even if they thought there would be no way that Bolt would go and have a season like this, they knew that Mumbai wanted him, so their best choice would have been to weaken Mumbai's roster. Just having a quick look, there are good young players that would have been of interest to me, a couple of experienced players that could have been handy, and some projects that I would have been happy to take a look at. Delhi had a player they didn't want, and they got rid of him. But they didn't make the most of him. They would have got Ashwin either way, even if it cost them a little more. They could have used the value of Bolt to get Ashwin and improve their roster, while also taking some players away from Mumbai. Taking money off Mumbai does absolutely nothing. Their owners print money. And in a salary cap and auction system, I'm not sure what the exchange of money really does to help your team. Mumbai Indians won the IPL in 2015 and 2017, and since then they have made 2 trades that have cost them nothing in talent, and guess what? They've won the last 2 tournaments as well. As a general rule in T20 cricket, I don't think teams really get trades just yet, but if I was to help, I'd probably start with one rule. Stop making Mumbai better.